Left-wing communism, an infantile disorder. Section. Left-wing communism in Germany. The leaders, the party, the class, the masses. The German communists we must now speak of call themselves not left-wingers, but, if I am not mistaken, an, quote, opposition on principle. From what follows below, it will, however, be seen that they reveal all the symptoms of the infantile disorder of leftism. Published by the, quote, local group in Frankfurt am Main, a pamphlet reflecting the point of view of this opposition, and entitled The Split in the Communist Party of Germany, the Spartacist League, sets forth the substance of this opposition's views most saliently, and with the utmost clarity and concision. A few quotations will suffice to acquaint the reader with that substance. Quote, the Communist Party is the party of the most determined class struggle. Politically, the transitional period between capitalism and socialism is one of the proletarian dictatorship. The question arises, who is to exercise this dictatorship? The Communist Party or the proletarian class? Fundamentally, should we strive for a dictatorship of the Communist Party or for a dictatorship of the proletarian class? End quote. The author of the pamphlet goes on to accuse the Central Committee of the Communist Party in Germany of seeking ways of achieving a coalition with the independent Social Democratic Party of Germany, and of raising, quote, the question of recognizing, in principle, all political means, end quote, of struggle, including parliamentarism, with the sole purpose of concealing its actual and main efforts to form a coalition with the independents. The pamphlet goes on to say, quote, the opposition have chosen another road. They are of the opinion that the question of the rule of the Communist Party and of the dictatorship of the party is merely one of tactics. In any case, rule by the Communist Party is the ultimate form of any party rule. Fundamentally, we must work for the dictatorship of the proletarian class. And all the measures of the party, its organizations, methods of struggle, strategy, and tactics should be directed to that end. Accordingly, all compromise with other parties, all reversion to parliamentary forms of struggle, which have become historically and politically obsolete, and any policy of maneuvering and compromise must be emphatically rejected. Specifically, proletarian methods of revolutionary struggle must be strongly emphasized. New forms of organization must be created on the widest basis and with the widest scope in order to enlist the most extensive proletarian circles and strata to take part in the revolutionary struggle under the leadership of the Communist Party. A workers' union, based on factory organizations, should be the rallying point for all revolutionary elements. This should unite all workers who follow the slogan, "Get out of the trade unions." It is here that the militant proletariat musters its ranks for battle. Recognition of the class struggle, of the Soviet system, and of the dictatorship should be sufficient for enrollment. All subsequent political education of the fighting masses and their political orientation in the struggle are the task of the Communist Party, which stands outside the workers' union. Quote continued. Consequently, two communist parties are now arrayed against each other. One is a party of leaders, which is out to organize the revolutionary struggle and to direct it from above, accepting compromises and parliamentarism so as to create a situation enabling it to join a coalition government exercising a dictatorship. The other is a mass party, which expects an upsurge of the revolutionary struggle from below, which knows and applies a single method in this struggle, a method which clearly leads to the goal, and rejects all parliamentary and opportunist methods. That single method is the unconditional overthrow of the bourgeoisie, so as then to set up the proletarian class dictatorship for the accomplishment of socialism. There, the dictatorship of leaders. Here, the dictatorship of the masses. That is our slogan. End of long quote. Such are the main features characterizing the views of the opposition in the German Communist Party. Any Bolshevik who has consciously participated in the development of Bolshevism since 1903, or has closely observed the development, will at once say, after reading these arguments, "What old and familiar rubbish! What left-wing childishness!" But let us examine these arguments a little more closely. The mere presentation of the question, quote, dictatorship of the party or dictatorship of the class, dictatorship party of the leaders or dictatorship party of the masses, end quote, testifies to most incredibly and hopelessly muddled thinking. These people want to invent something quite out of the ordinary, and, in their effort to be clever, make themselves ridiculous. It is common knowledge that masses are divided into classes, that the masses can be contrasted with classes only by contrasting the vast majority in general, regardless of division according to status in the social system of production, with categories holding a definite status in the social system of production. That, as a rule, and in most cases, at least in present-day civilized countries, classes are led by political parties. That political parties, as a general rule, are run by more or less stable groups composed of the most authoritative, influential, and experienced members, who are elected to the most responsible positions, and are called leaders. All this is elementary. All this is clear and simple. Why replace this with some kind of rigmarole, some new volap? On the one hand, these people seem to have got muddled when they found themselves in a predicament, when the party's abrupt transition from legality to illegality upset the customary, normal, and simple relations between leaders, parties, and classes. In Germany, as in other European countries, people had become too accustomed to legality, to the free and proper election of, quote, leaders at regular party congresses, to the convenient method of testing the class composition of parties through parliamentary elections, mass meetings, the press, the sentiments of the trade unions and other associations, etc. When, instead of this customary procedure, it became necessary, because of the stormy development of the Revolution and the development of the Civil War, to go over rapidly from legality to illegality, to combine the two, and to adopt the, quote, inconvenient and undemocratic methods of selecting or forming or preserving, quote, groups of leaders. People lost their bearings and began to think up some unmitigated nonsense. Certain members of the Communist Party of Holland, who were unlucky enough to be born in a small country with traditions and conditions of highly privileged and highly stable legality, and who had never seen a transition from legality to illegality, probably fell into confusion, lost their heads, and helped create these absurd inventions. On the other hand, one can see simply a thoughtless and incoherent use of the now fashionable terms, masses and leaders. These people have heard and memorized a great many attacks on leaders, in which the latter have been contrasted with the masses. However, they have proved unable to think matters out and gain a clear understanding of what it was all about. The divergence between leaders and masses was brought about with particular clarity and sharpness in all countries at the end of the imperialist war and following it. The principal reason for this was explained many times by Marx and Engels between the years 1852 and 92. From the example of Britain, that country's exclusive position led to the emergence, from the masses, of a semi-petty bourgeois, opportunist, labor aristocracy. The leaders of this labor aristocracy were constantly going over to the bourgeoisie, and were directly or indirectly on its payroll. Marx earned the honor of incurring the hatred of these disreputable persons by openly branding them as traitors. Present-day, 20th century, imperialism has given a few advanced countries an exceptionally privileged position, which, everywhere in the Second International, has produced a certain type of traitor, opportunist, and social chauvinist leaders, who champion the interests of their own craft, their own section of the labor aristocracy. The opportunist parties have become separated from the masses, i.e., from the broad strata of the working people, their majority, the lowest paid workers. The revolutionary proletariat cannot be victorious unless this evil is combated, unless the opportunist, social traitor leaders are exposed, discredited, and expelled. That is the policy the Third International has embarked on. To go so far in this connection as to contrast, in general, the dictatorship of the masses with the dictatorship of the leaders is ridiculously absurd and stupid. What is particularly amusing is that, in fact, instead of the old leaders, who hold generally accepted views on simple matters, new leaders are brought forth, under cover of the slogan, quote, "Down with the leaders," who talk rank stuff and nonsense. Such are Laufenberg, Wolfheim, Horner, Karl Schroeder, Friedrich Wendel, and Karl Erler in Germany. Erler's attempts to give the question more, quote, profundity, and to proclaim that in general political parties are unnecessary and bourgeois, are so supremely absurd that one can only shrug one's shoulders. It all goes to drive home the truth that a minor error can always assume monstrous proportions if it is persisted in, if profound justifications are sought for it, and if it is carried to its logical conclusion. Repudiation of the party principle and of party discipline That is what the opposition has arrived at. And this is tantamount to completely disarming the proletariat in the interests of the bourgeoisie. It all adds up to that petty bourgeois diffuseness and instability, that incapacity for sustained effort, unity, and organized action, which, if encouraged, must inevitably destroy any proletarian revolutionary movement. From the standpoint of communism, repudiation of the party principle means attempting to leap from the eve of capitalism's collapse in Germany, not to the lower or the intermediate phase of communism, but to the higher. We in Russia, in the third year since the overthrow of the bourgeoisie, are making the first steps in the transition from capitalism to socialism, or the lower stage of communism. Classes still remain, and will remain everywhere for years after the proletariat's conquest of power. Perhaps in Britain, where there is no peasantry, but where petty proprietors exist, this period may be shorter. The abolition of classes means not merely ousting the landowners and the capitalists. That is something we accomplished with comparative ease. It also means abolishing the small commodity producers, and they cannot be ousted or crushed. We must learn to live with them. They can, and must, be transformed and re-educated only by means of very prolonged, slow, and cautious organizational work. They surround the proletariat on every side with a petty bourgeois atmosphere, which permeates and corrupts the proletariat, and constantly causes among the proletariat relapses into petty bourgeois spinelessness, disunity, individualism, and alternating moods of exaltation and dejection. The strictest centralization and discipline are required within the political party of the proletariat in order to counteract this, in order that the organizational role of the proletariat, and that its principal role, may be exercised correctly, successfully, and victoriously. The dictatorship of the proletariat means a persistent struggle, bloody and bloodless, violent and peaceful, military and economic, educational and administrative, against the forces and traditions of the old society. The force of habit in millions and tens of millions is a most formidable force. Without a party of iron that has been tempered in the struggle, a party enjoying the confidence of all honest people in the class in question, a party capable of watching and influencing the mood of the masses, such a struggle cannot be waged successfully. It is 1,000 times easier to vanquish the centralized big bourgeoisie than to, quote, vanquish the millions upon millions of petty proprietors. However, through their ordinary, everyday, imperceptible, elusive, and demoralizing activities, they produce the very results which the bourgeoisie need and which tend to restore the bourgeoisie. Whoever brings about even the slightest weakening of the iron discipline of the party of the proletariat, especially during its dictatorship, is actually aiding the bourgeoisie against the proletariat. Parallel with the question of the leaders, the party, the class, the masses, we must pose the question of the, quote, reactionary trade unions. But first I shall take the liberty of making a few concluding remarks based on the experience of our party, There have always been attacks on the, quote, dictatorship of leaders in our party. The first time I heard such attacks, I recall, was in 1895, when officially no party yet existed, but a central group was taking shape in St. Petersburg, which was to assume the leadership of the district groups. At the 9th Congress of our party, April 1920, there was a small opposition, which also spoke against the, quote, dictatorship of leaders, against the, quote, oligarchy, and so on. There is therefore nothing surprising, new, or terrible in the, quote, infantile disorder of left-wing communism among the Germans. The ailment involves no danger, and after it the organism even becomes more robust. In our case, on the other hand, the rapid alternation of legal and illegal work, which made it necessary to keep the general staff, the leaders, under cover and cloak them in the greatest secrecy, sometimes gave rise to extremely dangerous consequences. The worst of these was that in 1912, the agent provocateur Malinovski got into the Bolshevik Central Committee. He betrayed scores and scores of the best and most loyal comrades, caused them to be sentenced to penal servitude, and hastened the death of many of them. That he did not cause still greater harm was due to the correct balance between legal and illegal work. As member of the party's Central Committee and Duma deputy, Malinovski was forced, in order to gain our confidence, to help us establish legal daily papers, which even under Tsarism were able to wage a struggle against the Menshevik opportunism, and to spread the fundamentals of Bolshevism in a suitably disguised form. While, with one hand, Malinovski sent scores and scores of the finest Bolsheviks to penal servitude and death, he was obliged, with the other, to assist in the education of scores and scores of thousands of new Bolsheviks through the medium of the legal press. Those German, and also British, American, French, and Italian comrades who are faced with the task of learning how to conduct revolutionary work within the reactionary trade unions would do well to give serious thought to this fact. In many countries, including the most advanced, the bourgeoisie are undoubtedly sending agent provocateurs into the communist parties, and will continue to do so. A skillful combining of illegal and legal work is one of the ways to combat this danger. End of section.